Okay, so it's been a week since we were here. So let's pick up. Where we were then. Remember, what we've just done is we've just examined those broad contexts that transformed American society and that really necessitated the rise or the invention of something called advertising. We looked at those broad structures. We looked at issues around economics and economic transformation. We looked at business strategy, and we looked at social factors to do with the crisis in the realm of production that advertising also helped to solve. So today, we're going to look at, we're going to trace through the particular industry that arose to perform those functions. So last time was, okay, here is why advertising is needed. And what we're going to look at today is the way in which an industry arose to fulfill those functions. And in particular, what I want to look at is the relationship between, and for the rest of the semester, if you want to understand advertising, you've got to understand this relationship. It's a central relationship to understand advertising. That is the relationship between clients, manufacturers on the one hand, businesses on the one hand, the media on the other hand, whatever that media may be, and then the advertising industry, which brings business and media together. That is, you cannot understand anything about advertising unless you understand how it is connected, the function that it performs between business and media. And that's what we're going to look at how that developed. And ultimately, what I want to be able to do, next time what we'll look at we'll actually look at some ads. We're not going to look at very many ads today because I think before we can look at ads, which is what I want to explain, right? What I want you to be able to do when you get to the end of the semester is to be able to look at an ad and to be able to say something about it, to be able to say something that you wouldn't be able to say at the start of the semester, to be able to say something about why the forms you see in it may have developed, when they developed, why they developed what they did, what possible effect could it have, why this message as opposed to another message. I want you to be able to say something intelligent about that is not just obvious, from the content. And to do that means we've got to be able to have some context for why ads look like they do. So I am interested in the content of ads, because that is, when we start off the semester saying that's what surrounds us, those are the stories that surround us. But to understand them, we've got to take one step back. We've got to kind of peel away the outer layers of the onion to get to the core of it. And especially, we have to be able to explain, and this actually is true, not just of advertising, but of almost anything you look at. You have to be able to explain changes. Why do things change? And when you talk about changes, why does advertising change? Why does it start off in one way and end up another way? We've got to be able to explain that dynamic, because again, there is nothing inevitable about it. It is those changes don't fall from heaven fully formed. They are the result of particular kinds of pressures, social, cultural, economic pressures. So we have to be able to explain changes, why things change. Now remember, and again, I keep coming back to this. Remember, this is the way advertising develops, for example, in North America. We're looking at a process that is constructed. There is almost nothing natural in the world. Perhaps the weather, but we actually now know that human beings actually can change the weather as well. So there's very little that's natural in the world. The world we live in is constructed, and we have to figure out how it's constructed. For example, in Europe, advertising develops very differently. It actually develops as a very different institution. Because for a long time, unlike the United States, advertising in Europe is limited to just print. Whereas, as we'll see later on today, whereas in America, we go from, there's newspapers and magazines, and then radio is introduced, then television is introduced really quickly. In Europe, for a long time, in fact, radio and television are kind of kept out of the advertising mix. And as a result, because there are very few radio ads, there are very few television ads, as a result, advertising actually develops very, very differently. In fact, right up until the present time, in some places in Europe, or some channels in Europe, the advertising is limited to one part of the evening. So it doesn't even appear between the programs. Sometimes it appears as one part, as one chunk sometime in the evening. If that's the context within which advertising is supposed to work, though, it changes the nature of the industry. So the social and economic, so there is nothing natural about it. There's nothing natural about it. To understand why things change, to understand, I would argue, to understand any kind of historical change requires you to do actually very specific kinds of analysis. Not broad analysis where it's the same all over the world, but actually very specific analysis in very, very specific context. Now, the social and economic movements that we examined last time took place between 1850 and 1920, somewhere around there. And in fact, and what we're going to look at today, I want to really, in the first part, concentrate on that period between 1850 and 1920. Because in fact, by 1920, the broad framework of the advertising industry, in terms of the relationship with industry and media, is pretty well established. It hasn't really fundamentally changed since then. There have been other important changes, of course. But essentially, the advertising industry, if we looked at the advertising industry in 1920 or so, the large agencies, we would recognize them we recognize them as modern agencies. And we'll look to see how things have changed as well. Now, so in this period, in the early period, from 1850 to about 1920, we can in fact identify three different stages. Okay, three different stages in the development of advertising. I want to go through these stages one at a time. The first stage is what we can call the stage of advertising as what they called it as a space jobber, from around the 1850s to the 1890s. Now we've seen, okay, let me explain what this means. We've seen how industrial expansion led to the production of the immense collection of commodities, okay, things that had to be sold. And we saw again the need for manufacturers to expand their markets nationally. That manufacturers have to start thinking about themselves not just as regional producers and sellers, but as national producers and sellers. How do you reach into other geographical areas? In fact, for example, these are rough figures I'm going to give you, but by 1890, for example, there are 4,000 manufacturers in the country who would like to advertise nationally. That is, who wanted to advertise in places other than where they are based. They want to expand to other markets. At the same time, so on the one hand, there is, from the side of business, there is a tremendous need manufacturers need to figure out how to get their product and word of their product out to beyond just where they're based. At the same time, there is a huge increase in the number of newspapers that you could place advertising in. In 1900, for example, there are over 2,200 daily newspapers. By 1909, there are over 13,000 weekly newspapers, all willing to take advertising. So we have the situation where actually manufacturers, business, they need to expand, and then you've got all these media, all these newspapers, and in the end of this period, magazines as well that have sprung up. And the question is, how do you put the two together? In fact, right at this stage, there is a great deal of what we call confusion in the marketplace. There simply isn't enough information, in fact, for the marketplace to function the way it needs to function. Manufacturers, who are potential advertisers, and newspapers, who are places where advertising could be carried, don't have enough information about each other. For example, manufacturers don't know. Let's start. We'll draw a little diagram. On the one hand, manufacturers, they don't know which newspapers or magazines to best place their ads in. Right? So information simply doesn't exist. These newspapers exist in other towns, in other cities, etc., in other regions, and manufacturers don't have any direct experience of them, don't have enough information. So manufacturers, in fact, don't know where to advertise. At the same time, you have media, newspapers, who don't really know much about manufacturers, because you've got this, someone from another city who wants to place an ad in what do you know about them? Are they reputable? Will they pay their bills, etc.? And so at this time, there is, as I said, a great deal of confusion. Manufacturers don't, no one has enough information. And so what's required at this time, in fact, is a third party to bring the needs of manufacturers or business and media together. And that is the advertising agents. That's for the first agents, in fact, the first businesses that we would think of as advertising agents. All they did, okay, the first agents, they did not create ads. All that the first agents did was simply bring business and media together. They actually helped to place ads. They helped to place ads. So they would actually put media and business together. And they would say, you know, they would be hired by a business, and they would offer their expertise to say, okay, here is where you can place your ad. Here is a newspaper in which you can buy, you know, this many columns of space to put your ad. At the same time, they will be able to, once they develop their relationships with media, they could also then, you know, the media could then rely upon the agents actually to make sure the bills were paid. So there needed to be a third party to bring the needs of business and media together when there wasn't enough information. Now what happened was they went from, so that was the first stage. That was essentially bringing people together. And the agents, the advertising agents, they got their money from the media. In fact, to start off with, they were clients actually of the media, because the media would give them 25% as a commission for whatever advertising they bought to the media. The commission system actually survives through to the present day. So again, what started off as, and it's not 25% anymore, but there is still that commission system, where advertising, and that's actually when, that's how advertising agencies measure their accounts. When they talk about, you know, when someone has just landed, to the present day, you know, J. Walter Thompson has landed a $50 million account with Pepsi. What they're talking about, that is how much Pepsi wants to spend on buying media, on buying time in newspapers, in television, etc. And J. Walter Thompson will get, whatever advertising agency, will get a percentage of that as their commission. And so that's why that's why agencies want to go, you want to attract the largest businesses you can with the largest advertising budgets, because your income is dependent upon how much they're going to spend on advertising. And we'll see the development of that in the next couple of classes. And they soon progressed from that. They went from this simple placing function to pretty soon they were actually, the agents actually started to buy space from the media themselves and then sell it on to businesses. So they went from simply placing to becoming brokers. Let's go to quote, the handout you'll need from today. I hope you bought it. If you printed it up, it's the one that's called the historical development of the advertising industry. Quote number 1. This is from a book called Social Communication and Advertising by William Leese et al. They say, talking about the situation, the increased number of newspapers was making the task of placing ads unaided too complex for the would-be advertiser. It was also changing the position of the agents. Newspapers lost interest in exclusive contracts with agents. In response, agents became independent brokers standing between the publishers and the advertisers who bargained with the agents for the best deal on advertising space. Because that's in the first stage, first 30, 40 years of the industry, all advertising agents do is broker space in some way. They direct businesses to media. They actually buy space in media and then sell it on to businesses. But that is all that first stage is involved in. All they are doing is placing ads. Nothing yet to do with writing ads. And that, as I said, was very broadly the function of advertising agencies into the 1890s or so. And then the situation begins to change. It begins to change for a number of reasons. Firstly, that is, we're now in, so this is what we have to figure out. If there are these different stages in how advertising develops, that is, at the start they were simply selling space and placing and dealing with and brokering space, but they moved from that to something else, why would